Good evening. Good evening to both of you, Gab and Isabel. Let's wait for a few more minutes.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Let me just prepare my deck. Okay. We'll start in 1 minute. So, even if there's only 3 or 4 or 5 of you, okay lang. I don't wanna waste your time waiting for the others. Okay, it's 6:02, no? So we can start, no? Thank you for joining. No? There's only 4 of you. Hopefully, more people will be joining, no? Yun lang, no? Again, I don't check attendance naman during synchronous sessions, but I hope people. It's actually the synchronous sessions are supposed to be a review or an introduction, so I think it might make the material more easier, no, to understand. if they don't want to join, it's okay na. In any case, I record this naman and post it on Canvas. All right. Sayang lang because I was gonna announce some things that might be useful for your online engagements as well as your um and your FIO, no, Final Integrated Output. Sige lang. All right. So again, announcements, no. So hopefully most of you or all of you are already on module 4, no. I know, no. I've noticed that some of you have already answered the discussion board, so which is good. Um, it's the longest module. Again, you can share the load if you want. The last module is really short, no, because to give you more time for your final integrated output, which will be your finals. You don't have any sort of separate final paper or final quiz or exam, except for the final integrated output. So just in case your classmates are wondering, Caesar keeps on mentioning that he what do you call this? He posts the recordings and the decks. No, they're usually located at the end of the corresponding module. So for the lectures on module 3, that's found at the end, no, of module 3, no, in the Canvas. So ito, I'll post this at the end of module 4, no, tonight or most likely tomorrow, by tomorrow. Just a few more announcements. No? I've gotten emails. No? I won't name names, of course. No? That some have been infected, unfortunately, by COVID. Or their family members, no, they need to take some time to take care of their mom or their dad. No? So, pakiusap lang, since homework 2 is a group assignment, no, uh, if for example you know, no, that they are suffering from COVID or they need to take care of their family members, don't be too pushy. Basically, especially if it's group work, no, if they're quote unquote busy taking care of their health or someone else's, yeah. So just hinay lang. I mean, for me, no, health and family always come first. So other things can wait. So I can be accommodating. No? I've given some accommodation to those who needed extra accommodation for homework number 1. I can be willing to do that for homework 2 as well if needed. But it's a group work naman, so I think the others can take the slack. Well, you know this already, no? So next week, it's good news for you guys. It's an academic break, no? So no classes next week, no? It's up to you if you want to do work, no? I think they're saying it's not required, but it's really up to you to manage your time. So the next synchronous class will be held on November 10th, so 2 weeks from now. So I'll be finishing module 4 in November 10. Then I wanted to spend the entire November 17 session on group consultation. So what I'm gonna do, there are 6 groups, no? Of course, it's optional. If your group thinks, no, sir, we don't need to consult with you. We don't think it's useful. Then okay lang, just tell me. No? So I will plan to give like 30 minutes each, no? Or I'm thinking, maybe 20 lang, 20 minutes each, no? For group consultations. Anything goes, no? If you want more tips on sources, or you want to sort of present the highlights of your emerging outline or draft, okay lang for me to comment. It's gonna be a free-for-all session. So 20-25 minutes siguro should be sufficient. No? So in the past, no, I didn't have, kasi quarter tayo in the past, no? So it was very fast-paced. I didn't have any quote-unquote free lecture or synchronous sessions to give away, no, or to accommodate full consultation. So I'll be sending siguro in the next few days or next within the week, no, sign up sheets siguro, or maybe next week for that. But if you don't sign up, then it means your group is not interested. So that's fine as well. And just to remind you, November 22 is the deadline for homework number. Yeah. All right. So I had a chat with Miss Erica Enha, no? Enha Brondo. I call her Erica, no? Your NSTP because formator, no? And she was saying, sir, Jay, you can probably advise your students or maybe what kinds of questions can be related to the SOCSI 13 part of the paper. Sabi ko, sige, I'll talk about it tonight. And that's in my next slide. No? But I wanted really to just remind you, no, that the biggest interaction is not just for your output, no, for your paper. It is really designed so that you can be able to engage with marginalized communities and get to know them better. No? More as an immersion. No? Of course, in your fourth year, probably if we already have face-to-face classes, you will actually go through an immersion. Babad kayo for a weekend. No? But similar case, no? Here we're trying, so it's more than just, let's ask questions diretso na so we can have information for our paper. For me, that's secondary. It's all about the experience. It's really your chance if you're not super, if you haven't had a lot of experiences dealing with the marginalized, this is a chance for you to get to know another side of the population. But just to answer the question, the link to SOCSI 13 is, remember our discussions about development challenges, Module 1, and even Module 2. No? There are challenges, there are measurements as well, there are dimensions when you discuss development challenges. You can also link it with Module 3 and 4, value chains, human capital, etc., manufacturing, introducing technology for efficiency, which may be linked to your Opman piece, or to the Opman piece of the paper, making sure there's a market, etc. So there are many ways that you can link your area engagement. And it's also good for me to explore what resources they have. Who are the actors helping the community thrive or improve their lot? What community resources do they have? So do not just extract. Your online engagements are not there for you to extract information. Treat it like a conversation, an immersive experience. So, so it's kind of obvious, but just to remind you, so warm up muna kayo, shoot the breeze a little bit, and then along the way during your conversation, you integrate your the questions you need, the questions and answers you need for your papers. So really, it's a conversation. So I might share some tips as well on Canvas, especially on the kinds of questions that you may ask. So ito, Ms. Brondo already shared this with you. I think it's in the document that was circulated to your section. It contains the schedules as well as the guidelines at the end. So just a quick recap of the content of the outline. The ones I highlighted in red are those that are more directly related to SOCSI 13. So the issues, obviously, again, development challenges, etc. And then just an analysis of the issues, opportunities, using the concepts we learned. Again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, the point about value chains, human capital, etc., etc. So feel free to use any framework. These are just some examples. You feel free to go beyond them. Marami pang iba. Donut economics, making sure that probably their livelihood can be less environmentally unfriendly, or more environmentally friendly. So, and then this part really is really more about your Opman. But then there's this other thing, beyond your Opman recommendations, because that's more very micro. That's for a particular business, micro business. Here, we're asking also what other interventions are needed beyond the Opman intervention. So this, again, it ties back to your macro picture, based on what you've learned, Module 3, Module 4 even, MSME development is the last part of your, that can be relevant as well. So these are the if you're asking me, no, kasi sabi nga ni Ms. Brondo, they might need some more guidance. No? If you want to know, to learn, just to provide you information on what are the parts that are more directly linked to SOX I-13. These are the parts. So, yon. Just wanted to provide a recap. So, yes, Ms. Brondo told me that she already shared this with you. So, that's correct. All right. Any questions before we proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sige. All right. So we go to part 2 of module 4. No, we covered last time. No, the first part, which was a bit. Sorry if it was too info overload for most of you. No, especially if you weren't able to cover some parts yet. No? So the first part was all about agri and agrarian reform. Hope you found some of them interesting. No? For me, that's one of my favorite topics these days. As I manage some agriculture-oriented projects in my work. So the next topic now is public finance and taxation. So the shortcut for this is fiscal. No? When you hear the word fiscal, simple lang naman. No? When you hear the word fiscal, it just means government. It's composed of two things. No? It can be government raising revenues, getting money, or spending money. That's fiscal. Public finance is all about that. There are two sides, no? The way government earns money, of course, to provide services, and the way it actually disburses or spends money. So let's cover first the revenue side. Later, we're gonna cover the expenditure side. Hopefully, some of you have already covered or at least skimmed parts of this submodule or this topic on Canvas. So the first, the most major source of revenue for government, where they earn their money, where government gets its money, is taxes. You know this. You probably are familiar with this, but I'm sure most of you don't. None of you pay income tax yet, but you pay indirect taxes. But there are two, just to sort of define taxes further. There are two categories of taxes: the direct taxes and indirect. So direct taxes, an example is income tax. So every April 15, or it depends on your profession. Some professions, they have to pay quarterly if they're self-employed, like doctors, etc. Kami, those earning purely what we call purely compensation income, we have to pay annually, or sometimes it's the employer that pays for us. But in my case, I actually remit the taxes directly to BIR or through a bank. Direct is you take an extra step, a separate step, to you get money, you file some paperwork, and you go to BIR or an accredited bank, and you pay your income tax. That's direct because I need to directly go to BIR or an accredited entity like a bank to pay my taxes. That's direct. Indirect naman, the most common example is value-added tax. Indirect is you don't line up to BIR just to pay that kind of tax. So for example, if you go to McDonald's, for simplicity's sake, let's say you order a quarter pounder and it costs 100 pesos. If you see in the receipt, 12% yata, 12% of that is what they call value-added tax. So 12 pesos of that burger, of that 100 peso burger, is value-added tax. That 12 pesos, I don't need to line up at BIR to pay the 12 pesos directly. No. Just by me buying that quarter pounder and paying the full 100 pesos, I'm already paying tax. Indirect siya. Diba? Kasi it doesn't require me to go to BIR to pay that 12 pesos. But just by buying that burger, it's already paid. Indirect yun. Whereas itong income tax, I need to actually pay for it directly or through an intermediary. So going further lang, there are three broad principles for any country, in terms of setting up a good tax system, what we call tax administration, how to administer a collection of taxes. First is theoretical justice. If you ask your parents about this, if you browse the BIR website or the forms, it's what we call progressive taxation. The more money that you earn, the more tax that you pay. So for example, the poorest segment, those earning 250,000 a year and below, they don't have to pay tax, 0%. Those earning 250 to 400K, they're now supposed to pay, I think, mga 5% or so. Then 400 to a higher percent, etc. So it goes up. And the richest bracket, mga 35 yata. The top, those earning, I think, yata 8 million and above. 35%, if I'm not mistaken. So progressive. That's what you call a progressive tax system. Meaning those who have more capacity, those who are more capable of paying, those who earn more also pay more. Kasi the theory behind it is they're, nakikinabang sila in society. So, and they are more able to. So social justice in a sense. That's the first. Fiscal adequacy, here it's just basically a reminder to the government. The tax rate should be able to be sufficient. The taxes that you earn, and of course, the taxes you earn are a function of the tax rates you impose. It should be sufficient for your spending. Not necessarily the current spending, because of course, governments, they borrow money as well, from international banks or financial institutions. It should be sufficient for spending now and in the future. Mabayaran din yung utang eventually. And the last is administrative feasibility. And this is very important. In the previous years, decades even, I experienced this. I started working in 2001. It was very cumbersome. The forms that you had to fill out, the attachments that you needed, and then the lines at BIR were just crazy. It was difficult for a taxpayer to pay taxes, which is kind of weird, diba? Kasi if you think about it, why will you make it hard for someone like me? I want to give you my money. Why will you give me a hard time? But that was the case before. Thankfully, in the past decades and even in the last 2 years, because of the train law, I don't know if any of you are assigned to the train law. It made things a lot simpler. The paperwork was just down to a few pages. Easy rules. It's no longer as burdensome. Now you can pay online even. I pay my taxes now through Land Bank. Online. So easy. So that's what you call administrative feasibility. It's easy. So it has to be not burdensome. It's clear, it's transparent. Same rules apply to everyone. And there's a fourth one actually, that doesn't really get discussed a lot. It's also credible. When I say credible, it means people are scared of the tax bureau. Meaning, if I don't pay taxes, mahuhuli ako, and they will come knocking at my door. In the US, the counterpart of our BIR is called the IRS, Internal Revenue Service. Magkamali ka lang, you skip your tax or you make a mistake, they will chase after you. That's why people are very, very paranoid. They are scared to the point that they will really make sure they file their taxes on time and correctly. Dito in the past, people were not scared. Parang, BIR will not know. So takas ako. So credible is like, people are trust, or people believe that you will run after them if you don't pay. So it's become better. But still there are a lot of people who try not to pay taxes, avoid paying taxes. I also provided this. This is sort of an added knowledge for you guys. No? When we talk about policymakers talk about taxes, no, there's this nice concept. The concept is easy to understand, but actually finding out the optimal rate is harder. No? So there's this concept called the Laffer curve. No, Laffer. No? It's Mr. Laffer. Actually, I have a video of Mr. Laffer on Canvas. The basic premise here is the question kasi is, oh, so I'm a government. I want to subscribe by these principles, especially fiscal adequacy. No? What will be the optimal tax rate, for example, no? that I should impose? Is it 10% of a person's salary, 20%, 30, etc., etc. So the curve is easy, the concept is easy, no? So if, for example, you impose a 0% tax rate, no, obviously you won't get much. You'll get zero. So useless, di ba? So let's study the extremes first. No? So zero. Pag 100 naman, you're taxing people's salary at 100%. It's also not optimal because you would disincentivize work. No? Parang, oh, I will be working, but government gets 100% of my salary. Why bother to work? No? So at a certain point, you useless din, di ba? So it's not productive if it's very small, very low. It's also counterproductive if it's very high. Kasi people would rather just not work. Kasi they're just surrendering. No? So yun nga, that's why it's a curve. No? The optimal tax rate is somewhere in the middle. Yun lang naman sinasabi ni Laffer curve. But again, finding the optimal tax rate, that's harder. No? That's not intuitive. No? So there are economists that try to estimate that. No? So this is an example from the Economist magazine. No? They were trying to find the sweet spot, no? At which it's at this point, no? the maximum revenues that can be earned. They were saying sa France yata came close. No? The funny thing with France, no, in France, the richest segments of the population, they pay almost 75%. Sobrang taas. Because, a lot of social services are completely free, no, healthcare, etc., etc. So it's a very welfare-ish state. There's a chat. Sir, is it appropriate to compare tax rates of different countries and follow the ones that are successful, or are there are more factors to consider, no? Kasi yun nga, you cannot just say, oh, Indonesia is imposing 30%. This is for personal tax rate, no? Iba pa yung corporate, no? And I'll go to that next, no? For individual, no, you're not supposed to compare. It's really, it boils down to the capacity of people to pay. No? Kasi, the economists and statisticians, they will do some simulations, some modeling based on people's, again, ability to pay. So it depends on the country context. No? On the other hand, for corporate tax rates naman, no, yes, countries usually and should compare corporate tax rates, no, with one another. No? And if you're part of the CREATE law group, no, that's an important point, no? Because especially if developing countries kayo and you're trying to attract investors, no, foreign investors, no, one variable that they look at, of course, not the only variable, are corporate income tax rates. And that's one of the purposes of the CREATE law, no, is to lower our corporate income tax rate so that we are at least near or at par with our neighbors. Kasi for corporate tax rates, we have one of the highest, no, in the region. So if that's the main variable that a foreign investor is looking at, ay di talo na tayo. So, but again, just mind you, no, that is not the only variable that that foreign investors are looking at. Pero for individual tax rates, no, you're not supposed to compare. It depends on your specific citizens' capacity. And again, it depends also on yun nga, di ba? Because one of the principles is fiscal adequacy. Kasi in the case of let's say, it also is a function of your expenditures, no? Kasi here, no, health provision is both public and private. In Europe, it's mostly uh, public. So of course, they will need more revenues, no, than us. So it's not just people's capacity to pay, but it's also the nature of how much you will need, no, for to deliver social services. So nuance siya. Thanks for that question. Very good question. Ito naman, there's another major source of revenues for government. It's what we call user fees. Anyone, would you care to guess what are user fees? And what makes them different from taxes? What are user fees? Wala muna. That's fine. Just jump in if you want. Chime in if you want. So user fees, sa taxes kasi, no, taxes in general, no, but there are some exceptions. In general, if I pay my tax, no, every April 15 or before that, I will not be able to say, oh, I will pay my tax, but this should go into this spending. I cannot. Government will decide. So it's not for a specific purpose. Bahala na si government. They will determine. It forms part of a larger pool, no, that is managed by the Bureau of Treasury. Now for user fees, it's specific, no. I pay a certain fee to receive a specific benefit. So the most common examples here are toll fees, no, SLEX and LEX, no, or I pay for road users tax, no, through my driver's license or car registration, no, because I want to drive. No. Those who are not driving, those who don't want a driver's license, they don't need to pay this kind of tax, no, or this kind of fee. So it's specific. It's tied to a specific benefit that you receive. So that's another major source of revenue. Another major source of revenue are what we call tariffs. Tariffs are just taxes, but they are taxes levied on imports. So that's why there's a different name for it. No, it's a specific kind of tax. No? It's the import tax that you pay. No? So, for example, no, the device, we don't manufacture any mobile device in the Philippines, di ba? Mostly it's imported. No? Kahit yung mga local brands like Cloudphone, MyPhone, Cherry, those are still imported from outside. So the device that you're using right now, your parents actually, when you bought that, no, when your parents bought that, or when you bought that, no, you had to pay tariffs. No? The company that sold you this had to pay import taxes. So for example, your computer costs 30,000. Siguro mga 2,000 out of that 30,000 selling price, no, was remitted by the, let's say, Octagon, no, to the Bureau of Customs, no, as tax for imports. And then you paid that eventually. So again, that's another tariffs, no, that's another source of, for you, no, it's an indirect tax, no, because you don't pay tariffs directly to customs. So by virtue of paying for this computer, you're already paying tariffs. So tariffs are just taxes on imports. And it's not, it's actually a major source. No? So look at 2019. I don't like using 2020 kasi nga it was the pandemic year. No? So the figures might be weird, might be outliers. No? GDP, for example, it was an outlier. So here, no, see, it's the one in blue. No? Bureau of Customs collects tariffs, no? Imposes tariffs and sort of examines, no, goods, no, that are imported to the Philippines. So the red one are the taxes. No? This one, Bureau of Treasury, no, the Treasury also earns money through foreign exchanges and then through dividends from government-owned corporations, which we'll get to in the next slide, I think. So tingnan nyo, out of 2.9, no, in 2019, out of 2 trillion, no, almost 3 trillion pesos, no, of revenues that government earned, no, almost a fifth, no, roughly, no, 6 divided by 30, almost a fifth were from tariffs, no, customs duties. No. Duties, tariffs, they're the same banana. So it's nothing to scoff at. No? Parang, yeah, malaki sila. It's still a major source as well. And you know, for the rice tariffication law, no, yeah, that's exactly what you mean by tariffs. No? You place a tax. So the rice that you import from Vietnam, from Thailand, a certain value is imposed, no, as tax. And that adds to our coffers, to the country's coffers. And other sources, as I mentioned, no, which goes to the Bureau of Treasury, part of this gray segment that you see. No? Other sources are these, no, revenues from state-owned corporations. No? So there's a term, no, for your for learning, no, for your education. There's a term called GOCCs, no, government-owned and controlled corporations. In the case of banks, no, they are called GFIs, government financial institutions. Well, first, they are government-owned. Kaya nga government GOCCs, diba? What makes them different from the other agencies like DepEd, DSWD? The main difference is GOCCs, part of the law, the charter that created them, is they are supposed to make money. Or in the case, sometimes they are supposed to lose money sometimes. In the case of NFA, no, if you are part of the rice tariffication law, they're like a company, no, that's supposed to earn money. So what happens is, so kunyari, Land Bank, no, DBP, those that might be familiar to you, no, they generate profit, no, and what happens is, or PAGCOR, no, what happens is they generate a profit. Part of the earnings that they have, no, is they use it to pay for their expenditures, no, expenses nila. Kasi for example, yung DSWD, no, it gets its funding for their expenditures through the budget. No? Pero itong mga to, in many cases, they're self-sustaining. No? They pay for their own expenditures. They don't need to get additional money from the government budget. So what happens is, part of the profit, they remit back to Treasury to form part of this, no, the total revenues. So 69 billion in 2019. Again, nothing to scoff at. That's still 69 billion pesos in 2019. Of course, that figure probably went down in 2020. I didn't check. So there are dozens of GOCCs right now in government. All right. So that was the revenue side. No? Again, fiscal policy is all about two sides. No? Government getting money, raising money, and government spending money. Now we go to the other side. Feel free lang to ask me questions. So in terms of government spending, we can go back to our usual computation of GDP. No? See, ito, di ba? We revisited this previously in module 3. So the usual method of computing for GDP or economic output is C plus I plus G plus NX. And the G part there is government spending. So government also plays a role in the economy, in economic activity. Siyempre, if government pays salaries of people, government buys things, government gives out ayuda, etc., they influence the way the economy operates. So ito, for example, see here, this was the second quarter of 2020, during the pandemic. This was the quarter when the Philippines post-war, so its largest contraction, largest fall, 16 yata yung GDP. And you know what's funny here, is if it were not for government spending, malamang government spending increased, from the previous year, because government had to keep, keep spending for ayuda, for stimulus, buying hospital equipment, buying vaccines, etc., etc. So if it were not for government spending, the GDP could have further sunk. But it was a positive. So instead of negative 16.7, remove this from the equation, it would fall. No? By the way, weighted to. So you can just divide this by 4, yung contribution of each. Again, as I mentioned to you, consumption again still takes the lion's share, private consumption of our economic. So yun lang, just to revisit, government spending is part of the economic activity. So government spending, in theory, and in many cases, in practice, it reflects the priorities. So what happens is, usually, you'll hear this in the news right now. Again, the government budget, or what we call government General Appropriations Act, is a law. So it needs Congress approval and then finally the president's approval. But what happens here is the executive branch. You guys are familiar with this, of course. There are 3 branches: executive, legislative, which is Congress, and judiciary. The executive, they propose. They actually submit a draft budget to Congress. So Malacanang tells all the agencies, show me your draft your own respective budgets. We will compile and then we will make adjustments. We will send that to Congress for their approval or not, or tweaks. And then Congress approves, both House of Representatives and the Senate, and then if they agree, it's up to the President for signature. So here, this was I don't want the 2021 budget, kasi again, this was a weird period, because of the pandemic. The 2020 budget was passed prior to the pandemic, kaya I like using this more. So you'll be surprised here, education takes the lion's share. It might not be a surprise to you, pero just as a trivia, you would see that the Department of Education every year since 1987 or 1988 has been getting the lion's share, the top amount, the largest amount among all departments. Why is that? Because if you look at the Constitution, it is explicitly stated there, education should get the lion's share. Should be the top focus of any budget. That's why it's usually the DepEd usually has the highest budget. Pero for 2020, just look at this. Actually, if from a sectoral point of view, actually no. Education did not. If you think about it, if you look at it closely, it did not get the lion's share. Actually, the lion's share went to infrastructure. Why? The 2 main agencies. There is a question. Let me address this after I explain this. So, the 2 main agencies for infrastructure development, infrastructure buildup, are DPWH, Public Works and Highways, and Transportation. So if you add both of these, that's higher than 654. So infrastructure actually got, not education. Education was a very close number too. And of course, agriculture, DA also has some infrastructure as well. DNR, DILG, some water infrastructure. And again, government spending reflects priorities. That's why you've heard the build mantra of this administration since 2016. Unfortunately, no, there were some delays. No? Yan ang problema sa government since before, not just this administration. There's weak capacity. No? They're good at developing plans, roadmaps, but execution, government has a poor track record since before, not just this administration. So build, build, build. I'll discuss this in the next slide. And the importance of build, build, build. There is a question. Sir, sorry if this is somewhat unrelated, but how does corruption enter the picture of government spending? How are Philippine government officials able to steal money from taxpayers? Very valid question. And, you know, this is especially, you're right, especially relevant for infrastructure. Since before, and you can ask civil society groups about this, unfortunately, there have been some estimates that only 30 or at least, no, I'm sorry, at most 50% lang of the budget, no, that goes through an infrastructure project is really spent for the actual construction. If the other percentages go to corruption, pockets of many people. No? There are many ways by which, no, I mean, yun nga, we are good at making laws, no, but people are also clever when it comes to work around. One example lang, I'll give you an example. There's supposed to be a bidding, no, for infrastructure projects. At the local level, for example, sa LGU, no, there is usually a quote-unquote mafia, no, construction mafia. So what happens is, sige, kasi they're supposed to submit bids, no? 3 bids, for example, or 4 bids at the minimum. What happens is, magkukuntsaba sila. Parang, sige, this year, we'll submit bids, no? Pero ikaw mananalo this time around. No? Pero lahat tayo bloated. Kasi part of it will go to, grease money, yung corruption money. I have to pay off a councilor or a mayor, no? Tapos the next year naman, siya naman mananalo, no? Pero still bloated. I have this one case, no? I was talking to a mayor. The mayor was cursing, no? Parang, this councilor, kasi at the local level, Congress is the council, no? The local development council. Parang mura siya ng mura. Parang, kasi, you know, they wanted to get 1 million, no? Each from the construction company for them to release the budget. So marami, there are many ways. There are many ways. Sa construction, it has been a rampant source of corruption. Hindi lang infrastructure, but you know the pork barrel case, no, Janet Napoles, no? Kasi before, legislators had their own what they call discretionary funding. They can do what they want, no? Social services. So the pork barrel case can be summarized into the following lang. Janet Napoles came out with these fly-by-night NGOs, no? These congressmen will, no, kasi on paper, parang, it's nice, no? They will give to this NGO for poverty reduction. Pero fly-by-night, no? They're not even doing any kind of project. It just goes back, no? Kickback lang. So there are many ways. There are many, many ways. I think for SOCSI 14, which is more policy/governance, you will learn more about it. If you're interested, yes, I see your sad face. If you're more interested, I have more sources on this. No? Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Yun nga, problema kasi sa atin, no? Especially infrastructure, no? In many countries, there are, even in the US, even in Western countries, there is corruption. But the bulk of the money meant for a project, the bulk of it goes to that project. Dito hindi, it's the reverse. The bulk goes to corruption. At least in the past, even up to now, no, especially infrastructure, the bulk goes to corruption. Kaya kita nyo, after a while, there's a new road. It's paved, no? Tapos maya-maya, after a few months lang, umulan, wala na. Sira na naman, di ba? Craters, etc., etc. So, unfortunately, that's the reality. So, again, but going back to infrastructure, theoretically, why is it good? Why is infrastructure good? And I'll answer this for you guys as well. So infrastructure is good, no? Again, there are 2 ways of thinking about this. No? There is the direct benefit and there's the indirect benefit to the economy and to the people. One is if there is a thriving construction industry, no, public and private, no, there is a direct increase in the economic activity in a particular sector, no, construction. No? So those selling equipment, those selling cement, those selling materials for construction, booming yan. And so will employment, right? Because they will need to hire people to as construction workers, as mga overseers, mga architects, engineers. So there's boom, no? Directly, no? In particular sectors, no? And also in support sectors. No? And there's indirect also because and the good thing with infrastructure, no, and again going back to our point about investment and manufacturing, no, infrastructure there is a return, no. If you compare infrastructure with consumption kasi once you consume tapos na. Infra is there is return on investment because it facilitates commerce, no? If you build a road from the market, from the farm to the market, it facilitates trade, commerce, no? If you build expressways, no, that make it faster for you to ship cargo to this point or tourism to flourish, like the NLEX, no, or SCTEX, no, ayun, you will see more movement, etc. Economic activity is largely dependent on movement, you know, from a macro perspective. So, business can thrive. The factories, you know, can thrive as well kasi mas madali to ship, etc., etc. So, both direct and indirectly, it is a boon to the economy. So, I support the government's focus on infrastructure. Kasi napag-iwanan tayo. Again, if you compare ourselves to even our neighbors, no? Thailand, before we were at the same level now because they focus on infrastructure. Iwan na tayo. And no, prior to the pandemic, no, NEDA was estimating the benefits to the economy. They estimated some significant contributions to the GDP or the economy, no? At least 1.3 trillion by next year. And again, because there are direct and indirect benefits to the economy, you expect a lot of indirect jobs, millions of jobs. Even. And you know, I follow Mark Villar also. Because you know, this administration, in my opinion, the cabinet appointments have been a mixed bag. There are some really bad ones, but there are really good ones. So Mark Villar, I consider him as one of the good appointments. No? He has some posts, no, computing for the number of jobs created by the build. So infrastructure build-up is good, but again, unfortunately, there is that reality of potential corruption, and it is a rampant source. Bakit siya rampant source? Because of the high peso figures. These are big ticket items, so you cannot build infrastructure for cheap. That's why it's very tempting. It's very lucrative. Imagine if it's a 100 million infrastructure, no? Just 1% of that, that's already a million. So, it's very lucrative also for corruption, unfortunately. So that's government spending for you. Now, this slide naman is, and I also have this on Canvas, no? Talks about playing fiscal policy naman. No? Government using approaches on revenue raising or spending, no, as deliberate tools, no, to affect behavior. So two things lang. Let's take the revenue raising side again. And let's see how it can, no, how governments can use taxation to shape behavior. On the one hand, it can be a stick. No? You know the term carrot and stick. No? On the one hand, it can be a stick. No? When I was younger, no, when I was your age, no, I used to smoke a lot. I kicked the habit 10 years ago. If you're currently smoking, I don't recommend it. It's really a bad habit. No? Of course, ako before, akala ko cool, di ba? And then I got addicted. But so don't even try it if you're not smoking. If you're smoking right now, quit it. So I used to, back in my day, no, I used to smoke a pack a day or even more. But it was cheap, no? I could buy a pack of cigarettes for 20 pesos only. Or less pa, no? Yung mga cheap ones like mga mga 17 pesos lang yung Winston. It's really cheap. But then, to earn revenues, no, they thought, and to curb, no, and to disincentivize it, they started jacking up the price of cigarettes. They call it excise tax, and liquor also. No? So you'll notice, like, you compare the price of cigarettes today versus that 10 years ago. Grabe, taas. So it's one way by which government can play around with taxation to shape behavior. So it can disincentivize behavior. If you're part of the train law, no, part of the train law was uh, increasing tax rates on sugary beverages, no, to curb sugar consumption. I think exempted yung mga Diet Coke, etc., etc. No? Pero yung mga Coke, mga Sesto, mga sugary beverage, no, you're now paying more if you're buying that. So it's a win-win if you think about it, because the government is getting money, more money, and at the same time, you're trying to curb certain unwanted behavior. On the other hand, taxation can also be used as a tool to incentivize behavior. Ito, for example, if you're part of the CREATE team, good question. No? There was a debate, no, during the train law. No? The question is, sir, isn't that kind of anti-poor? Yes and no. Because yun nga, parang if in the long run, no, if the, let's say, if the poor keeps on smoking and drinking, no, it's not only that they will, it will cost more in the long run, no? Kasi magkakasakit sila, they have to go to the hospital, and it might even be death, no? So it is not necessarily anti-poor. No? They were actually complaining, no? Yung 3-in-1, that was a contentious issue, no? Yung 3-in-1 as part of the train law, because that contains a lot of sugar. No? Actually, a joke nga dyan is 3-in-1 coffee mixes are actually not coffee. It's actually milk and sugar with coffee. Kasi coffee content is just so little. No? So it's not anti-poor. It just so happened, tama naman kayo, no, that a lot of the poor drink Coke, drink 3-in-1. No? Pero yun nga, it's supposed to sort of try to convince them to stay away. At least Coke, no? Kung sanay sila sa 3-in-1, so be it. No? Pero maybe just do it black or whatever. No? So it's supposed to safeguard their health as well. So it's supposed to. Pero yun nga, sometimes it's hard to change behavior. So I don't think it's anti-poor. No? But that was a popular argument, no, during the debates surrounding the train law, especially the 3-in-1, tsaka yung mga juice. Ayun. So on the other hand, it can be a carrot. No? So for example, for corporations, no, if you're part of the CREATE law team, no, for homework number 2, no. So sometimes government, it's not the only factor that investors look at. No? Even domestically, no, sometimes those far-flung areas, they want to attract investors from Manila or from Cebu, from Davao. They will say, no, oh, if you invest here, we will give you a tax-free status for 5 years. Or the same with foreigners. No? The country can say, oh, we've lowered our tax rates. So it sort of becomes an attractive proposition. But again, the problem is sometimes that's not the only thing that they look at. Eh, kung wala mahal ang kuryente or the land is not good or pangit yung lugar, useless. So again, it can be one of the tools for incentivizing behavior. The good example here is tax levels, lowering it. CREATE wanted to lower it. It actually lowered the tax rates to make it more attractive. But the trade-off there is government will, at least in the short term, earn less. Kasi, di ba, lower tax rates for revenues. Pero they're saying naman, no, because you will attract more, then ma-offset lang. So, remains to be seen, in my opinion. So that's the taxation part. No? How does government use taxation to shape behavior or to provide disincentive? Dito naman, let's go to the spending side. What is now is the role of government spending, no? When it comes to the what's the effect in the economy? No? So government spending, no, there's this person, no, and you can read more on Canvas. No? John Maynard Keynes, no, he's sort of seen as the father of government intervention. Ayaw sa kanya ng mga free market people. No? For him kasi, he was known, he became popular during the Great Depression kasi he was a promoter of government intervention and regulations, government stimulus, etc., etc. So Keynes was of the opinion that government spending has a role, no? Especially if in times of downturns, recession, mababa GDP, the economy is facing a slump. Kasi it's good conceptually, no? And it has worked, no? In the past. It really has worked. So what happens is, you know, the economy is in a slump, no? Government will, let's say, give cash transfers to people or to companies, no? Some tax holidays, etc. What ends up happening is people have more money, therefore they can still go on their own consumption business, no? They buy from the shops keep afloat, the shops can continue employing the people, and then those people again earn money, etc. So there are multiplier effects, no, in the economy, no? Employment and business. And yeah, Keynes was famous for cracking a joke. No, na, actually, it's also useful in a downturn. No, na the government should pay people, that's a stimulus, no, to dig holes in the ground and then cover them. Parang sabi niya kasi, at least, you know, there's people earning money and those people will still buy stuff. Therefore, the shops are happy and, you know, good for the economy. Of course, that's being facetious. No? That was a joke. Now, the problem now is during the pandemic, the question is, will this work during the pandemic? The answer is yes and no. It, of course, no. The ayuda, of course, it had a role to play. No? It sort of lifted some people. No? It prevented some people from starvation, etc., etc. But the problem is it is not enough. No? It wasn't enough. It is not enough to lift us out of the economic doldrums. No? Kasi you give, it's not super applicable. It's more muted. No? The effect is more modest during a pandemic because people are afraid to go out. Even if you give them money, no, ako, if you give me money, I have a toddler, no, where the adults here are fully vaccinated, but we have a toddler who's not vaccinated. If I go out, I become a carrier, kawawa yung toddler ko. So there's that consumer fear also. But now, no, everyone is out. So at least it's starting. So in general, if there is a downturn, Keynes is correct. No? Government can intervene, provide stimulus, and it can boost the economy, at least in the beginning stages. Until things go back to normal, no? Meaning things go back to good productivity again. So that's, I just wanted you just to learn about this, no? Because government's fiscal approaches, no, fiscal tools, no, can also be used intentionally. No? It's not just to earn money and to pay for social services. They can play around with these tools, no, to have certain effects that they want. So that's an important point as well. So this is the last part, no, of the fiscal lesson, fiscal section. So it's all about debt. No? And this is my favorite topic because, you know, there has been a huge misconception about debt. So I wanted to demystify debt, government debt. So my question to you, no, I hope someone can answer or at least try to answer. When you talk about government debt, you see this in the papers. No? Government debt is at a record high, blah, blah, blah. Is that bad? Are government loans bad? Anyone care to answer? Okay, Gabriel. Go for it.
Sir, I think if the government uses loans to invest in industries that they think can actually grow and give them a return on their investment in the future, like to pay for the interest and actually grow the economy at the same time, I don't think it would be bad. But it has to be invested properly.
I agree with you. No, it has to go to the right spending. Anyone else? Okay, so it's not necessarily bad. That's what Gabriel is saying. Anyone else? Chat message. Sure, it can help improve the country in general, similar to how a business can have debt when starting. Okay, that's actually a good answer. So before we answer this, and I like the fact that you're not saying it's bad. Let's have an analogy. I like using analogies because it makes it easier to digest. So this is a micro example. Later we'll adopt this or adapt this to the country level. So simple analogy, and this is on Canvas as well. There are two people. For example, both of them get the same loan amount from a bank. They got a 120,000 peso loan. No interest, 0%, and they're supposed to pay back the loan on 12, kaya nga 1 year, 12 equal installments, 10,000 each month. So, and the salary of Mario is 15,000, salary of Maria is 100,000 per month. So obviously, who has a harder time paying the monthly loan? So I made it easier. There's what we call debt to income ratio. Kay Mario, the loan represents 2/3 already of his salary. Maria naman, money lang, di ba? Parang kayang-kaya, 10% lang. So obviously, Mario will have a harder time. So this is the main point about debt. Tama si Gabriel, there are two sides, and that is my caveat. Debt is not bad, Debt is okay as long as one, you can pay it off eventually, comfortably. Second is, yes, it's good if it's not good actually if mangungutang ka but you're not spending it on the right things. From a country perspective, that means yes, you invest on infrastructure, invest on things that can boost the economy or on social services. Sometimes naman kasi you need to spend talaga. Human capital, for example. Things that are needed and things that will bring about greater economic prosperity. So if you look at this, I just invented this term, debt to income ratio. Pero kasi, remember this concept, there is actually, when it comes to country level indicators, there's such a thing as debt to GDP ratio. And remember, GDP is just a country's income. So debt to GDP ratio is like debt to income ratio. Think of Mario as a country, Maria as a country. So the Philippines has each country has a debt to GDP ratio. Your debt divided by your country income. So you'll notice, it was really, really unfortunate that the country already had, because we were growing rapidly in the last 10 years, thanks to the Pinoy administration before that, and at least the first few years of this administration. So, diba, numerator and denominator. So one way is debt can be constant, pero GDP is going up. Therefore, the entire formula is going down. Pwedeng constant yung numerator, but the denominators is going bigger, di bababa yung figure, di ba? Or could be the other way, debt is going down, GDP is going up, di all the more nabababa. So we were at the first time the country experienced a debt to GDP ratio of less than 40% was in 2018. People were like, wow, ang galing ng Philippines. But then the pandemic happened. And you see the sharp increase. If you can see this properly, this I copied this from one of the fiscal experts, si Dr. Reside. Ito yun, look at the black line. That's the government debt to GDP. It's now almost, the charts show almost 60, but because we kept on borrowing, the last time I heard it's now 6.4% of GDP. Compare that now to this, 40%. Talagang the government had to borrow for health and other things. So, sayang. But again, yun nga, don't trust the newspapers when they become so sensationalist. In social science, usually absolute numbers are useless. You have to make it relative to something. Kaya nga poverty incidence. It's not necessarily the number of poor, although that's important. It's what is the percentage of poor. So most of the indicators, if you'll notice from your module 2, they are percentages because everything has to be relative. Even yung death rate or case rate of COVID, it's funny, people are saying, "Ay, grabe ang Philippines, so many cases." And number 10 tayo in the world in terms of population. So it has to be divided by the population. You can compare ourselves in absolute terms with, let's say, Singapore. The entire Singaporean population can fit in Metro Manila easily. So in social science, you have to remember it has to be divided by something to make it puts into context. It puts everything into context. So just as a rule of thumb, debt to GDP ratio of 60, the sort of warning level based on experts is roughly 60. Pero okay pa yung 60. If it gets to 65, 70, then all the more there's a red flag na. But 60 to 70, especially if it's needed, right now it's needed, pandemic tayo, it's still okay. So we are still okay. Unfortunately, yun lang, it had to spike. Pero we can still pay it off. That's what it means. If you're less than 60 or just around that area, okay pa. So don't believe this, kasi they will always say, grabe, 11 trillion. But you have to put it into context. Compared to what? Relative to what? So that's a key lesson for you guys. When you spew out numbers, don't just give absolute numbers. You put it into context by dividing it to something. And that's what would make it more comparable to other things. That is okay as long as you're in a good position to pay it off. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, second to the last thing, is the concept of credit rating, which is a measure of a country or an entity's ability to pay back their loans. So it's not just the 60% bank debt to GDP. No, there is such a thing as called as credit rating. And you have trusted, what they call credit ratings agencies. There are three major ones globally, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard and Poor's. You're probably, if you are in the habit of reading the news every day or regularly, you've probably heard their names. Credit rating is not just applicable to a country, it's applicable to any entity. Can be to a person, could be to government agencies, could be to private corporations. It's useful kasi for example, I like the point earlier of, I think it was you, Isabel, parang even corporations will need to borrow. Imagine nyo lang to. Imagine if Ramon Ang is not allowed to borrow to build the Bulacan Airport. That's trillions of pesos. He doesn't have that cash right now. So debt, as you learn in your finance class, is a way by which you can spend for things now while smoothing your consumption with your managing your cash flow. You learn that in accounting as well in your second year. So credit rating is basically what I do, no, what a person or an entity, a corporation or a government does is the credit rating agency, Moody's, Fitch, Standard and Poor's, they will assess. There's a number of variables. Basically, they will say whether you are credit worthy or not. And if you are credit worthy, there are different levels. No? They call it investment grade, no? Meaning okay ka or sobrang okay ka, super solid, etc., etc. So that's credit rating. In the Philippines, we are, no? We are, and you go through this DOF primer. No? It's in Tagalog even, which I like about DOF, trying to make it easier for people to understand. Basically, it says na if you're investment grade, no, if you're okay, you're credit worthy, then hindi dapat matakot, no. The lenders should not be scared to let you borrow. And we have been, no, since even before or the start of the Pinoy administration, we have already been investment grade, and we've gone up even further, no, 2 notches pa, which means lenders should not worry about the Philippines reneging on our debt, which is good. And the other benefit of having a good credit rating is the interest rates are lower. Kasi yun nga, di ba, the interest, sometimes part of the interest rate that you pay when you borrow money is the risk. No? The more risky you are, kaya nga sa microfinance, ang taas ng interest. The more risky you are, the higher the interest you have to pay. No? It's counterintuitive, pero it's the risk. Eh. Parang, diba? Parang you're risky. I will only let you borrow pag I get a higher return. So it's the same. No? If you're a person, in the US, they do this. No? Kasi dito collateral based. No? I need to borrow money. Ako, as a person, I need to borrow money from a bank. I will use my land as collateral. Collateral lang naman means is if I don't pay back the money, then you get my land. In the States kasi, it's all about credit scores. No? I will answer a bunch of questions. The bank will do a background check, and they come up with the score. Based on your score, they will now tell you, yes, you can borrow. And then if you're high risk or a low risk, then you have lower interest rate. So tayo, as a country, the good thing is we have been credit worthy since before, since several years ago. So don't worry, no. Don't kayo magpaano to the sensational headlines. So this is an important thing to understand. Credit rating. So if it's investment grade and above, it means that country, that corporation is credit worthy, means low risk of defaulting from there. And I like to end with this. No? What do you think of this? No, I mean, of course, it's election season, and I hope all of you are registered to vote. No? Could be probably it's the first time that you're voting. Please, if you're not registered, I think you can still register until the end of the week. No? I hope you vote next year. No? But it's the campaign season, election season, so there are a lot of unsolicited advice, proposals that presidentials adopt. There's this one NGO called Freedom from Debt Coalition. They've been around since the last 2-3 decades. I know some people from FDC. They are saying, presidential should adopt this stance. No? You should support the cancellation of debt. Because right now, we have outstanding debt to the World Bank, to the ADB, to other countries, China, Japan, whatever, no, even private corporations. So, they're saying that you ask for forgiveness, wag na lang, that's not paid back, so we save money, we can pay for other things. What do you think of this proposal? Gabriel.
I think it's gonna lessen the credibility of the Philippines, especially if we're gonna consider applying for loans in the future.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was gonna say. That's kind of stupid because as a developing country, eventually we will still need to borrow, di ba? And then if you just default on your loans, if the next time you need to borrow, it's like you're a person, no? Pinautang mo yung barkada mo, no? Parang di nagbayad. Will you actually lend that person? You're a fool, di ba, if you lend that person. So it's the same thing. So it's kind of stupid. No? It will definitely lessen our credibility. And at the end of the day, it's still our contract, no? Whether that was made by the past president or not. It's ganun eh. We still have to honor our commitments. And you're right. No? The pragmatic thinking there is, yun, wala tayong credibility in the future when we want to borrow loans. Or if they will let us borrow, no, super high na interest because there's that risk involved. So that ends our session on fiscal policy and public finance. So I hope that was useful for you guys. No, I know that was probably a lot of information if you haven't covered the material in Canvas, but please do cover the material in Canvas because this is supposed to be just a recap or an introduction. I really, again, the expectation from all the courses, no, not just my classes, you learn more from the asynchronous lessons. Any questions? Anyone? Yeah, some of you might be hungry or you're probably eating, no? But feel free, no? Again, if you have questions, then you can email me if you want to set up a consultation. So I don't see any other questions. No? And thank you for the questions and thank you for showing up. I know a lot of people are swamped. All of you are swamped with work, with your workload right now, overwhelmed. So I know a lot are no longer attending synchronous sessions. So I really appreciate those of you who I see on a weekly basis. Again, see you in 2 weeks' time. We don't have a session next week. Take your well-deserved break. Relax. Do what you want. Just chill. Take care of your health, everybody. Have a good night. See you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.